on next generation. So thanks to Judging Point, we have organized a panel with fantastic speakers joining us. Justin is in a perfect position to introduce the panelists and also moderate the conversation on this topic. And before he does that, let me introduce him. Justin is the president and creative director of the Judging Point agency. In addition to running a business that advocates for diversity and inclusive values, he is active in charity and community efforts, establishing him as a leader and role model for our community. Justin has been a great champion for education and a good friend of York University. He's a special advisor for the Faculty of Science and has been supporting the libraries and the Chinese Cultural Day events at York University. So thank you, Justin, and the panelists for joining us. I will hand over the time to you.
Thank you very much, Jack. Oh, is this microphone on? Hello, check. Oh, there we go. Great. So welcome, everybody. We've got an hour which goes by very quickly. I first want to introduce my panel. Starting to my right at the end is Gavin Barrett, who is the CEO and the founder of Barrett & Welsh Advertising. And my immediate right is Bill Hutchison. And Bill and I met a long time ago when he was at CFTO Toronto. He is the program director. Well, actually, he'll tell you a bit more about that. He's recently retired, so it's kind of moving news. But he was very recently the program coordinator at Seneca College for journalism, and he's a former CTV News Toronto anchor. To my immediate left is Amandalina Letterio, who's a national anchor, producer, and reporter for Global News. And to the far left is Anwar Knight, who I met many, many years ago when he was doing the weather at CTV. He's a reporter, producer, and he's at the Legislative Assembly of Ontario doing a new program, which I'm sure he'll tell you about. So before we get into the questions of the topic, I'd like to just start going, starting with you, Gavin. If you could just give a few words about your background, and so that everybody understands where each of the panelists is coming from when we get into the discussion.
Sure, thanks. Is this on? Yeah, so I'll start by saying literally where I come from. I'm an immigrant. I came from the city of Bombay, now Mumbai, via Hong Kong to Toronto back in 1996. And I founded my ad agency, Barrett & Welsh, in 2003, and it focuses on multicultural advertising and branding, DEI work in terms of communications. Basically, the purpose of what we do is to create access and inclusion through communications for racialized minorities. Over to you.
All right. Well, my name is Bill Hutchison. As Justin mentioned, I was in the industry, media industry, for 37 years. I worked in Yellowknife, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Calgary, and Toronto at CTV Toronto for 27 years. Last 14 years, I've been teaching at Seneca College, and the last 5 years as program coordinator for journalism. And as Justin mentioned, just retired.
I'm Amandalina Letterio. I'm a national anchor, producer, reporter, and a little bit of everything else at Global News. I'm currently on weekends, and then during the week, I'm a reporter. And I've been doing this for over 10 years. I've lived across Canada. I've been in many newsrooms across Canada, which I feel has given my experience a little bit of an angle. And I'm currently in a newsroom, so if you have questions about that, I can touch on it.
My name is Anwar Knight. I started my career in radio many years ago. It's still my favorite medium, very powerful, a personal connection. And I think it's that intimate connection which has supercharged the digital side, which is now podcasting. Currently, I'm a reporter and producer at the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, known as Queen's Park. A new initiative to engage the public with the hope of engaging them to become more part of democracy. You look at, many elections, the voter turnout's very poor, so we're thinking if we can engage them, even the history of the building and the process, that will be also inspiring people to learn more about it. Before that, I was at CTV News in Toronto working with Bill for nearly 20 years as a weather anchor and reporter. And I enjoyed every minute of it. And before that, I was at Global, and I'm also doing fill-in at CBC News with Heather Hiscox in the morning and the Weather Network. So rounded about, I enjoy telling stories, and I think it's just a fascinating opportunity to connect. And I'm very pleased to be a part of this panel and navigate through the challenges when it comes to truth in the media.
Thank you, Anwar. So we have a lot of experience up here, and I'm going to start with you, Bill. So let's just round it off to 4 decades in the industry. 4 decades in the industry, not including technology. We won't address technology right now. What are some of the biggest changes you saw in your career from the beginning to when you stopped working on air?
That's a tough question because most of the changes you've seen, you can track it back to technology in one way or another. Marshall McLuhan said it back in the 60s, the medium is a message. As the technology has changed, the media has changed. One thing that has affected the media is the demographics of this country. I started back in the late 70s, and the demographics of Canada were vastly different then. There's a lot more multiculturalism, there's a lot more diversity now, and there's that diversity in the media as well. So the media is now covering stories that would have been overlooked, not necessarily ignored, but overlooked in the past. So covering different kinds of stories and covering different kinds of culture and getting to know different kinds of people from different parts of the world. So that has affected the media significantly. Pretty much every other change, though, you can track back to technology, whether it's the social media, whether it's even just going from shooting film when I started to shooting videotape to shooting on disc to shooting, the technology has driven a lot of the change in the media.
And would you say that most of the changes were reactive, or were they planned by the industry itself?
The changes in technology were planned. The changes in the media were not necessarily, they were more reactive, especially when things went online. The legacy media was slow to react to that. They didn't know how to monetize that. And that was the bottom line, is how do you make money out of this? So they were slow to react. They were putting full newscasts online and saying, hey, if you didn't watch it at 6 o'clock, you can watch it whenever you want online, which basically cannibalized their audience because now we were getting revenue at 6 o'clock. Online, we weren't getting any revenue. So they just didn't know how to deal with this. Independent producers were much faster to react and see the potential than legacy media.
So that sort of leads into my next question, which is, you were right in the educational environment. You saw a lot of the young generation who want to come in and go into journalism. How would you describe the difference of the people who want to young people who want to get into journalism today versus when you first started and when you were at school, because you were at Ryerson at that time?
Some things are the same, some things are different. When I looked at the class that I went through Ryerson with, and I look at my current class, I could say, okay, that person is a lot like this person. They have the passion for journalism. There's a core group of students that are passionate about journalism. They want to go out there and tell stories. They want to be the fact checkers. They want to be the people who expose corruption, et cetera. And that was true when I started. When I started, we all wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein. Well, actually, I wanted to be Robert Redford, but we all wanted to uncover, the big scandals. And there are still students like that who want to uncover those big scandals. Then there's a whole group in the middle that think, well, this is kind of an interesting career. This would be kind of fun. And we had a lot of students like that in the 70s when I was going to school, and they did well. They got into the industry and they found their career path. And we still have that. The difference that I do see, though, is because I go through a lot of applications as a coordinator, or I did when I was a coordinator. Now that I'm retired, I can remember that. Is that I've got a lot of students who are applying saying, I have something to say and I want a platform to say it. And you have to sit them down and say, your mother cares about your opinion. Nobody else does. If you're going to be a reporter, you report the facts. You're not here to be an influencer. And there's a lot of students who come into journalism thinking, I'm going to be an influencer. I'm going to get out there and tell my opinion. Well, sorry, that's not journalism then. So that has changed because that's the career they want.
Mm-hmm. So the lines have been blurred a lot. Gavin, we're both in the advertising industry, and very often we have clients that, everybody knows in advertising that getting, a paragraph of editorial is worth more than any ad you can pay for. And they always try to convince us to, make some, even make something look like it's editorial, make it look like it was endorsed by the media. How have you dealt with the blurring of the lines when a client is insisting that their story, which is a marketing story, they're selling product or service, but they want it to be part of the news cycle? How do you deal with that?
Well, I'm actually pretty direct with my clients that they better have something newsworthy, and then it'll be in the news. But that's because, I think we're an ad agency and a branding agency that's a B corporation, so we take a very serious look at things like that. To me personally, it's much more valuable for me to do an ad that will run alongside much read editorial, because that editorial is really why somebody is reading that publication. My ad alongside that, not pretending to be anything else but an ad, actually I think benefits more the brand that I might be serving with that ad than a piece of advertorial. Now, advertorials have been around since the late 19th century, and I think the word itself goes back to 1946, and we've seen advertorials, we've seen infomercials, and now in the digital era we're seeing native advertising, which are all basically forms of advertising that masquerade as editorial material. I think there is a place for that approach, and the words themselves clue us in. Actually, the word infomercial is probably best. There's a form of content that is valuable because it's information. It is either commercial information or practical information. I'll take an example. Everyone here probably on York University campus has seen the Viva buses, that come on to university campus and drop off students, pick up students. When Viva was launched back in 2005, nobody knew how to use a bus rapid transit service. And so we created advertorials that ran in English across, all the routes that the buses ran. And we created, advertorials also in Chinese, because there was a sizable population in Richmond Hill and Markham that needed to know how to use the service. That couldn't be done through a standard ad. It had to be done through what we call advertorials, which are information-heavy, tutorials, really, in how to use a service that was completely unfamiliar at that point. So there is a place for that, but I think equally between the news organization as well as a principled advertising agency, and ideally a client or a brand with principles, there can be a line drawn that we don't blur the distinctions between these forms, and it's to the benefit of the reader or the consumer or the user.
But the products themselves, there's guidelines. So, for example, National Post, Toronto Star, they have a product. It's a formula. If you want to get 4 pages of advertorial for your client, you just have to give them an advertiser's a list, and as long as they can sell 1 page of advertising, they'll give you 1 page of advertorial. And the deal is that it has to say in fine print that this is advertising, and the fonts have to be different from the rest of the newspaper. But do you actually believe, because some of them are very convincing, do you believe that the average reader understands that these 4 pages are a different font? And trust me, the font size is very small in the upper right-hand corner saying this is advertising. Do you think that they're very often fooled? Because it's a product meant to kind of mislead. They even use staff writers to write that content, actually.
So I actually think it's a dangerous path to follow, to use staff writers to write that. I think you should be unabashed about it being advertorial material, about it being advertising or information material, educational material. I think you're likely to benefit from the credibility that we're trying. It's a mistake trying to borrow the credibility of a journalist for an ad. That's fundamentally something I feel as a good advertising practitioner is an error of judgment. I think an ad that is an ad should be unabashedly that. And if it's an advertorial, it has to have a reason for being an advertorial. And the delivery of information or education, for example, the two examples I gave earlier, justify that because ads are not content heavy. I think the masquerade is the question mark. And we have to admit that everyone's trying to monetize. And the big challenge for sustainability in journalism, I think, is how do we find revenue streams? And one of my other hats until recently, I was the chair of one of only 5 of Canada's not-for-profit journalism organizations. It was an organization called New Canadian Media, and it was the biggest challenge of New Canadian Media to find a way to monetize its excellent news work. But they were also very clear that they didn't want to sort of cannibalize their own reputation by offering branded content and sponsored content. So I think principles matter. I think it actually benefits the brands to hold to or to support those principles. The money is still coming into the publication, so everyone has to hold the line, to maintain integrity.
Is it successful at holding the line?
I think there's a lot of expediency, and that's because a shortage of money makes one expedient, I think, and that's across the board. Mm-hmm. As an ad agency, I can speak as an ad agency owner. I can speak to our position in the middle, that if we're choked for revenues, we'll do whatever a client tells us to do. If a client's going through a bad time, they'll do whatever it takes to get out there. And the publication desperately needs the money to survive. So everyone's being expedient. So that's when the blurring happens. It's a hard real life in the business world challenge for everyone to negotiate.
Do you find that products like that, because more so in American television, a lot of the news networks will even give you, advertisers paid segments where it looks like an actual news report. Does that not erode public trust if people, find out that this was just a shill for a product?
100% it does. I think though the public trust in news media is eroded across multiple places, and this is just one of those places. There's an erosion because of the kinds of media that are now being consumed, and where people are gathering their news from or consuming the news. There's an erosion of because there is more opinion than news. Not that there's not a place for opinion from qualified journalists, but there is more opinion than news. It very often seems to be. There's the need to monetize, which has made big publications, really successful ones, content factories. Mm-hmm. In fact, the commoditization, the danger is always commoditization of something that is vital. And news is vital. And when we commoditize it, then because we have to find the revenue somewhere, I think we imperil it.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely, I agree. Well, Anwar, you have sort of had an experience in many facets of the industry. You've been employed by the big broadcasters. You run your own podcast, so you've seen every different type of business model. Now, when you're doing a podcast, obviously you are producing content, you're shooting. You also have to make sure the bills get paid. Yeah. But then you have also work in an environment where your job is to just create good stories. What does it do to the journalistic integrity when the person creating the content is also in charge of making sure that the bottom line gets taken care of?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, I think there's a transformational shift from journalism at its core was to inform people, and now it's to entertain. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if we're going to look at Canadian media, I think a part of this equation has to be the big billion-dollar media companies. They have a responsibility, right? They don't want to invest in news anymore. That's a fact. In the last 20 years, over 450 newsrooms in Canada have been shut down. In the last 2 years, more than 60 have been shut down. And so that's a first part of the equation. If we're talking about the Canadian landscape, if they want the media license, they want to put their branding on their conventional channels and sell advertising, they also should be regulated to bring that promise of performance of local news content. And it's important to note that there is still money to be made. You know, if you want to look at an example of Vista Radio out in BC, relatively small mom and pop shop, now has acquired the 21 radio stations that Bell shut down, flipped the switch on. They are now the second largest radio broadcasting corporation in the country. They've said not only will they keep the original employees, they'll hire more. They've adapted a digital focus, so they're going to be focusing on local news content, and they are making money. So money can be made. Is it the billions of dollars that the big media guys want? Maybe not. But money can be made. So I think that's the first part. The second part, the onus is on the public. You mentioned about advertorials. Critical thinking is gone. It has eroded, and that responsibility lies on everyone who starts to engage in content. So whether it's advertorial or whether it's bona fide journalism, at the end of the day, and this I think circles back to Generation Z at the forefront of the digital revolution, but more so Generation Alpha, who've only known digital. So they don't realize when they interact with a story on their phone that now there's algorithms that is going to steer other content that likely will align with their beliefs. It will filter out anything that questions that, generally speaking. So critical thinking is really what it's about. It's about assessing what content you are taking in. Are you able to establish, oh, this is an advert for, gutter guards? Or is this really something important because it's whether it's bad for the environment or there's some real news focus on it? You make that assertion then, and I think that's an important part to play. How do we deal with that? I think it's education.
Yeah, is that not too much responsibility to put on the general public? No. In the old days, 6 o'clock comes around, I turn on the newscast, I can just sit back and relax, and the news is being fed to me. Now I have to actually go out and hunt for pieces that have journalistic integrity and things like that. Like, is that not asking too much from the public?
But no, because I think even if you look at Generation Alpha and the next generation, I think it needs to be included in the curriculum of school. We started to do stranger danger. We started now to talk about online safety. Fact or fiction? This is important. This is now where our society is going to go. You can look in the last 5 years, whether it's climate change, whether it's COVID, whether it's the US election, the Canadian election. We have to teach the next generation to always question what's on their phone. And what I find interesting, even in the last week, you look at these influencers, they use this is for the election, they use the badge of independent journalist to get that credibility. That's the badge. Well, I'm an independent journalist, but they don't follow the integral part of being a journalist. Right. Impartiality, fact, accuracy. And if nobody is going to be using critical thinking, that is the problem we're sitting at. So I think this is a real dangerous spot that we're in. Yes, it's more challenging to sell ad spots, whether it's on linear TV, whether it's on a podcast or in print. But I think there are people that want factual information. That'll always be there, and it connects to storytelling. And I think that there should be more regulation on what's out there, because anybody can put out anything, and if you don't question it, where does it take us? You mentioned about, the 6 o'clock. You're right. Bill and I knew that. CTV was the most watched newsroom in Canada. And it was at a time where you finished your workday, you raced home, you were making dinner, and you tuned in at 6 o'clock. What happened in the world? That doesn't happen anymore. Yes, there's still an audience, but it is completely fragmented. And I think what you're seeing as well through the evolution of digital. So before people would sit for an hour-long newscast, then they had the exciting live streams. They thought this is a new opportunity for news media. Good place we could do some product placement, still connect with the audience. I actually produced and developed the first live stream for Facebook on CTV of its kind in North America. It was a roving morning show that went to different locations and we moved about live, right? We engaged with 50 to 60,000 people, 6 out of 7 continents, but we went from 1 hour linear TV, 25 minutes on Facebook to now 15 to 20 seconds. That's the problem we're in. The 15 to 22nd generation.
Okay, so knowing that attention spans have just completely gone down the toilet. Before, all we had to worry about was, you choose which network you trust, and it might be the network, it might be the anchor that you trust, and then all I have to do is consume the news. With this generation, not only are the stories shorter, or not even stories, they're just getting the headlines, but there's multiple sources. What kind of faith do you have? And I'm going to give this question to you, Amandalina, because you are part of still what is network news. You're up against a lot of competition out there in terms of where people can get their news. What is your perspective and your view on this generation Alpha, and where traditional news will fit in with the whole buffet of choices out there online?
I mean, I think it's something that we're going to have to figure out. I don't know if there's an answer to it, because from my perspective, in the last 10 plus years that I've been in this industry, I feel like the relationship between journalists and the public has changed, and there's a bit of distrust there from the public with us. Whereas they could just, similar to what everybody on this panel is saying, they could just see, an influencer who possibly has a personal interest in the story, a personal opinion in the story, give their personal opinion, and they don't know the difference between what is real journalism and what is an opinion. And that's sort of what we're up against. And I find that sometimes when I'm even out interacting in the public, I will have people say to me, well, did you see this influencer that said this about this? And I'm like, well, nobody's regulating that person. That person's just sharing their opinions. So it is this, it's going to be a weird thing to navigate, and I'm not quite sure how we do it. I personally really try to stress the fact that, where are you getting your information from? Is it a reliable news source? How can that person be held accountable if they're not giving you real, valid information?
Okay, so let me go back a bit. Where is the mistrust in the news coming from?
I think I saw a big difference when the pandemic happened. Okay. I think, people were really frustrated with what was happening in the world. I think that, we were the only source of information, that was bridging what was happening to the public, and they were frustrated. So it ended up creating this distrust with the news.
With the news, or the source that was giving the news? Because you were really just reporting it. It was the frustration unfairly being taken out on the media, but it really should have been aimed to government or policymakers.
Exactly, and that's pretty much what it was. But it's like shooting the messenger, essentially, right? So I feel like that created a lot of distrust, and then after that, I don't think it's gotten better. I think we see it now with elections. We see accusations of, not, or being one-sided. Perhaps somebody just tuned into one segment where we talked to a liberal strategist and they didn't see our segment with a conservative strategist, right? So they're not giving you their full attention span. It's, there's all these things at play. Not giving you your full attention span, and then they're just taking what they see at face value and not critically thinking about it and saying, did I get the full picture here?
So you feel that there's a lot of people out there that have less trust in a news organization that has a whole infrastructure set up, and would rather trust an influencer that works from their basement and has one point of view.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't even say it's just the younger generation. I've seen it from people of all ages. I think what's happening now is possibly because of the algorithm, you're seeing a lot more of what you want to see in front of you, what you interact with more. And I think in general, human nature is to gravitate toward opinions that corroborate your perspective. But I think we're seeing more that people aren't even open to understanding different perspectives. I always, give this example, which is I've had friends that have known me forever, who have a relationship with me, and during the pandemic would say right to me, well, the media is lying about this whole thing, right? And I'd be sitting there like, what I do for a living, right? And I would look at them and I'm like, this is an intelligent person, an educated person. They're not even curious to say to me, hey, you're sitting in that newsroom. Is this happening? What's going on there? Are you lying to us? Nobody even, the people who were saying it to me did not even want that perspective, did not even want that answer. I honestly think sometimes now, because of the world we're in, people just want to believe what they want to believe. And I've seen that.
Can I just add in? There was, I don't know if this is working now. There was a study out of University of Waterloo that said those who were trying to persuade others with misinformation were more likely to be duped by other misinformation. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, journalistic integrity is no longer applicable because the audience now isn't looking for it. They're looking for a viewpoint. They want to belong. And social media empowers that. So that's why I say, you know, and I really mean that, I think we're in a dangerous space here around the world if we don't somehow try to navigate and figure out a way that we need to rein it in.
And that used to be relegated to the editorial columns at the back of the paper.
You're right.
But now it's actually taken over. So, Bill, you were talking about the different types of students that come to your program. First of all, is the definition of journalism, I know it's not fundamentally changing for you, but is it fundamentally changing in the public?
That is a debate that goes on in the media. It goes on among journalism professors as well. And I was a moderator on a panel with journalism professors discussing this, and one person was asserting that you can be an activist and you can be a journalist at the same time. I said, no, you can't. You can't be one. You have to be one or the other. You can't be out there with your viewpoint and saying, this is what you have to believe. And we had a professor who actually would tell students that you can shade the truth if it's for the greater good. He's not teaching in our program anymore, not just because of that. But I sat down with him. I said, you can't tell him that. It took a couple semesters to convince students that what he said was not right. Don't believe this. You cannot change the truth. You can't change the facts. Report the facts. Be accurate. Be honest. So there is a debate going on. Can you be a journalist and an activist, or can you have your biases out in the open? There's also that debate that goes on in newsrooms. I'm sure goes on in your newsroom right now, where I'm allowed to have my opinions, and it's better if the public knows what my opinions are, so that when they see me report, they know where I'm coming from. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not right. When you're a reporter, Anwar, and I'm sure for you as well, you can't help but have opinions. You can't help but have your own viewpoint on things. You've covered stories, and you know the stories quite often better than a lot of other people because you've covered them. So you may have opinions, but when you go to cover it, then as a reporter, what you have to do is set aside those viewpoints and be fair and balanced. Be fair to both sides. Look at it from both sides. Be fair. Objectivity is a nice notion, but the reality is everybody's got their own personal experiences. You just got to be fair and balanced, and that's what we try to teach our students. And that's, I think, a battle, a debate that's going on in newsrooms across the country.
So, Gavin, in the work that we deal a lot also with media, not only of different cultures, but from different countries as well. A lot of people, because they're getting everything through their phone, there are certain diaspora here in Canada where they'll get the Canadian news, but they'll also get news stories through international sources, whether it's on something like WeChat and whatnot. And the truth on a WeChat article written by a reporter who might be on CCP's payroll, their truth is very different than our truth, especially when you're talking about the same story, right? Because I've been reading a lot of international stories coming out of China about tariffs, and then reading the American and Canadian stories. I mean, they're both truth to those parties. So what is the truth, and how much does it matter?
What is the truth? That epic question from the ages.
You've got 10 seconds to answer. Yeah. Meaning of life is the second one.
It's not truth social. Well, it's. I don't think there are competing truths. I think truth is truth. I think that is. You have to intellectually approach this and reason your way through what it is you are seeing or reading or hearing, and use your reason to navigate and assess to what degree there is fact, what those facts mean. When there's an interloper, an interlocutor, in between, who's taken responsibility to share their version of that, especially in social media, like the ones you mentioned. WeChat and WhatsApp are the two main culprits here as platforms. As a person of Indian origin, WhatsApp basically dominates Indian conversations, even here in Canada, and the information being passed along is, by and large, garbage. And it has to be said that it is. On WeChat, we have an alternate universe issue. There's only one sanctioned universe allowed, and the minute you cross that invisible line, you are, the word we use is shadow banned, or there will be other consequences. And that's a different environment. So just as an example, my Hong Kong friends won't use WeChat. They will only use WhatsApp, which has its own problems, as I just mentioned. And my mainland Chinese friends here in Canada will use WeChat because that's a habit they came here with, and they're not going to give it up easily. So now what's on those platforms is always a matter of a question. Frankly, I think it's completely useless that people share snippets of information or think that they should curate your news feed by sharing, you should be doing that work. We as readers, as consumers of the news, need to be doing our own curation of our own reading habits. It's back in the old days, and I'm dating myself, it's the newspapers you subscribed to. You chose which ones you wanted to read, and yeah, you might not want to read The Sun, and you might choose the Globe and Mail, but that's how you curated your approach to the news. But both fundamentally still gave you factual news at a certain level, and you went to the editorial pages, and you might get a rant or two, and you also expected that, and the clarity has diminished. And the noise has increased on the social media platforms, because and I'm going to say they're interlopers because they don't deserve to interpret the news for us. These are self-appointed roles, and I've exited WhatsApp groups because somebody has decided to absolutely, what's the word they use for force feed, foie gras, force feed us on that channel with crap. It's just
it's
unbearable.
Quick rewards and instant gratification.
Yeah.
That's what and they call it the TikTok brain. Some people say that, right?
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
You can trust me.
I trust everyone who tells me to trust them.
So, Bill, in the program, and I was part of your advisory council. We talked a lot about having to teach journalist students how to also be an entrepreneur. They're going to have to probably, piece together an income with 2 or 3 different jobs. When you are worrying about where the money's coming from, but at the same time you're being told, make sure you stick to your guns, and is that not mixed messaging?
I'm sure some of the students think that. It is difficult because, legacy media doesn't pay the way it used to. I think you were talking about this earlier when we were getting ready here, that there's a lot of freelancers that come in, and they're trying to put together enough hours to make a living out of it. So a lot of students will have to be more content creators. Now, you can be a content creator and still be a journalist if you are using only facts, if you're not inserting your own opinion, if you're not writing advertising. And there's B2B, business-to-business content creation, where you can use your journalism skills, where you are not writing advertorials, but you are writing articles that a business might want to use on its site, that's telling factual information and not advertising for that site. So that is a revenue stream that for entrepreneurs as journalists that they will explore, and they will make a good money at that.
But all the time, the definitions
they get blurred. Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and it's very difficult. And I can understand if you're starting out and you get hired by a company to write an article. You're getting paid by this company, so you kind of in the back of your mind, well, I should say something that favors this. If you're going to be a good journalist, you got to stick to your guns, and you'll get a better reputation if you are a good reporter. than you if you were writing there something that.
So can a young grad who, you know, they really want to be a journalist at heart, but then they're on the payroll of a couple of companies to write, you know, very positive articles. Like what you said before, you can't be an activist and a journalist at the same time. Are they not damaging their own journalistic integrity if they are also seen as the person who shills for this law firm? Or this,
well, there's a difference between shilling for a company and writing an article for a company. Like if say CAA hires you to write an article about how do you prepare your car for winter, you can be accurate and straightforward with information about that without saying, by the way, you should have CAA.
Yeah.
And CAA will put that content on their site because it's good, reliable information. It doesn't have to say get CAA because if you get stuck in the snow, they'll tow you out or they'll boost your car. That's still good journalism if you're doing that. Yes, you're getting paid to write an article, but you're not getting paid to write an advertisement. And I know it's a difficult concept for a lot of students to get their heads wrapped around. Because the tendency is, well, they're paying me, so I've got to say something nice.
You know, you can add to that, though, too, with the closure of newsrooms in Canada and the layoffs of veteran broadcasters, anchors, reporters, writers, news directors, those that held the core principles of journalism and would pass on to young talent, that has also eroded.
Yes.
So already it's the blind leading the blind. Amanda, you mentioned you wear many hats. That's what the newsrooms are. It's multimedia journalists now, right? So not only are you a reporter, you're an editor, you're a videographer, you're going to do a hit for linear, you're going to do your social, you're going to do your online, and if they have a radio station, you're going to do a hit on radio. So you're not really good in any one thing. You're pretty good in a whole bunch of things. How do you put together a real story when you have all these duties to do? It's impossible. You're stretched too thin. They try because they want to be in the business. But this is, again, part of the collapse of the industry, and I think it's going to have detrimental effects.
And it kind of contributes to that lack of trust from the public, of course, because we can't be as thorough.
So, Amandalina, how do you see, you know, social media and you know, thousands of influencers, if they all agree that there's a shift in the industry, that they can do that overnight, but corporations can't? How do you see that large media corporations are they going to be able to keep up and be competitive with what's being offered out there online and so easy to access and so easy to digest?
I mean, we have a really big push for streaming and digital now. I'm pretty sure all of the major newsrooms in Canada have their own streaming platform. At Global, we do. It's a really big thing for us. So I think there's interest in being in competition with those platforms in a sense. But in terms of long term, I'm not sure how they compete with that. I mean, your phone is more immediate. Everyone's got their phone in their hand all the time. Not everyone has their news channel on all the time. So it'll be interesting to see what direction it goes in.
And the independent, so-called independent journalist who has a YouTube channel just has to get one sponsor. And it can feed them, right? And they can operate. They don't need to have, you know, all sorts of researchers and staff to pay and you know.
And it's important to remember too, they're getting paid based on their views. Right. So they might sensationalize what they're saying to you. That's when that analytical thinking comes in. I'm not getting paid based on views. I have a salary, I have a standard that I have to adhere to, and what goes to air goes through a ton of people.
But no, wait a second. It's always been the case with television news. Your ratings matter. Right. I mean, CTV, we were...
They're not as paying as much attention anymore.
But if we don't have the viewers...
That's right.
Then it doesn't matter. Like CTV was #1, and they charged a fortune for their advertising, and so we had a good, healthy budget at CTV Toronto at CFTO for our news, and we also spit out millions in profits every year. News departments are not doing that anymore, but they're still competing for those eyeballs. They're still competing for those thumb stops on social media. So legacy media is still competing the same way as those independent people are. The independent people have to go out and sell themselves as well. I have some friends who started their own radio program, and they admitted they were doing more work for less money because they had to go out and find sponsors.
You have to hustle.
It's great to create content, but you got to find somebody who's going to pay for it, and that's a huge part of it. So the independent producer may get one sponsor, and that can pay their bills, but it's not really a lucrative career at that point. They're still doing the same thing basically. Newsrooms are still trying to get the audience, and I know that we're more entertainment in news now. I heard that criticism in the 80s. It's too much infotainment. It's too much entertainment in news. Well, yeah, there's always going to be a certain amount of, you should cover the top stories, you should cover what's important, but some of the newscasts are also going to be lighter stuff because people don't want to sit there and watch, death and destruction.
I think the difference is now there's clickbait and now there's sensationalism, right?
Yeah.
Like the benchmark of shock and awe is off the charts, right? And I think that's the difference between something that, wow, this is really cool, imagine this person doing this, to this guy's stupid, look what he's doing, right? And that might be viewed differently depending on the generation, the age that you are. But Bill, to your point, viewers do matter. And I think what you're seeing is a shift now is also this paywall idea, right? How many people will click on the paywall and say, yeah, I'm going to pay $2.99? It doesn't happen, but that may be the salvation in the end. You find a credible source, and there are some very legitimate sources still out there. But as a viewer, a listener, a reader, you'll have to say, does truth matter? Am I willing to support that? I think it has to be nominal. You can't say $8.99 a month. But I'm willing to pay $2.99 to get real facts because they do matter. And I don't know where the audience is on that yet.
On one hand, it may be the salvation, but it could also be, it's a barrier for a lot of people.
You're right.
Because during the election, I remember talking to people and I'd say, well, didn't you know that this is the policy or this is what they've done? No, the media should be reporting on that. They did.
Yes.
They did. You weren't paying attention.
Right.
Yeah,
this was in the Globe. This was on. This was on
point.
CBC or this was on CTV. You just weren't paying attention. And so, how do you get the public to engage as well? I think Pandora's box has been opened, and I don't know if you can get them back on, get them back to caring enough to pay attention to that because there's so much noise. I'm a much smarter man than I said. We've got more information at our fingertips now, and we're less informed.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody seems to gravitate towards the tasty treat, whether it's more entertaining, more fun. I know a number of people, I guess you'd call them millennials at this point, they're in their early 40s. The first time they had actually really heard Carney speak was on Jon Stewart. So an American comedy show when he did the interview, and that's also because we've lost all our comedy shows in Canada, but he goes down there, and that's the first time many people had heard the interim prime minister at the time speak for the first time.
Again, an entertainment venue.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
You
might glean some facts from it, but it's there for entertainment, right? And it gets to, do we really care if a young person wants to get their news through a comedy network, but it's factual? Do we really care?
But does it change from being factual? If those numbers drop, do they also then follow suit of what digital is doing? I don't know.
We don't know.
But young people have never been that engaged in news. 19, 20-year-olds are not engaged in news. Even when I was 19 and 20, and I was in journalism, I cared about news. But a lot of my friends didn't care because they weren't invested in any way.
So they didn't seek it out.
Yeah.
But the thing is, now those things are getting fed to their phones. So people that my 10-year-old son starts asking about Biden and Trump, and I was like, how do you even know? He said, he came across Instagram, right? So the people that weren't interested, well, they just wouldn't look for it. But now it's actually jumping into your platform. So it's actually feeding the misinformation.
But it's not news that's coming to them.
Right.
Well,
right.
That's the problem.
But they believe it
and
is.
then they get that habit of, I've got stuff here that sounds newsy.
Exactly.
But I think circling back that there has to be some sort of education in the school system, because ultimately, if we live through our phones and through 150 characters of a text, I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, will they be able to have a conversation face-to-face like this in 20 years? That keeps me up at night, right?
We're
that is important.
Texting each other.
Exactly. And that's a
true.
problem because that's, communicating in person is where you learn empathy, kindness, understanding, respect. So that is why I circle around this, that it's really important that something is done. It's not just about, some material that's questionable. I think it could actually change our society as a whole going forward.
I took a class out
Might
too.
have already have, yeah.
One of the strikes here at York, I said, hey, this is a great opportunity, guys. Let's go out and cover this instead of what we're going to do in class. Let's grab some cameras, go out and cover it. We got out there. There's the picket line going on. There's a lineup of cars, and the students are sitting on their phones. Put your phones down. Go talk to these people.
Right.
Said,
Exactly.
don't put the camera in the. Go talk to them first.
That's right.
Find out why they're okay. Now you've got their side. Now get the other side. You got to go talk to all those people in the car, and it just didn't occur to them because, well, I'll just get it on my phone and say, well, I can see what's going on, but you know, and that. How do you change that habit though?
So once the generation, the crossover generation that has seen, you know, how legacy media ran and radio and print and, you know, all the way up until now, once those people are not in the picture anymore to influence the younger generation, how does this generation Alpha, the 8-9-year-olds now that will be in college in, you know, maybe 9 or 10 years, who influences them? Anwar?
Well, do they become disgruntled adults? You know, some people that are using platforms now. Except they're more savvy. They can do 10 different platforms instead of 2. Right? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. You know, the Oxford English Dictionary last year, their word of the year was brain rot. Right?
Yeah.
and it's based on, I think, 34,000 votes, and they have conversations. And, you know, they connected it to how social media, and I wrote this down, I thought it was fascinating, how it eroded intellectual curiosity and depth, right? So I think that's where we're headed. I don't have the answer to that question, but it's something that needs to be looked at.
So, I mean, Amandalina, where is news, if you had to make a prediction, where is it headed? And I'm not talking about 10, 20 years. We have no idea. But even in the next 3 or 4 years, what road is it going down? Where, you know, we just had an election. Depending on how things go, we might be at the polls again in a couple of years. I mean, every election cycle, we see how news is handled differently. What do you see happening in the short term?
I mean, every year it changes, I feel. I do think that there's a stress for more output in terms of competing with the internet. More content, more stories. There's a bit more of a stress for that, more immediacy of those stories. So I think that's really where it's happening. And then also there's a scale back on the people that are putting it out. So that's definitely this weird line that we're balancing. The platforms are going to change. I think it's just, you know, again, this year I really saw a difference in, Global's had a streaming platform for quite some time, but City News got a streaming platform. You know, everyone's really pushing that 24-hour streaming. I can just put
Are you
it on
getting
my
the
phone.
eyeballs though?
We're getting the views,
You're
yeah.
getting the-
Our streaming platform is one of the most viewed, so.
Do you feel that it might be cannibalizing your on-air stuff?
I don't think so. I think there's still a viewership. I feel like the majority of the people that are still watching news are older and still have television and still have an interest in television. But, you know, for the younger generation, I mean, my brother made a joke to me when I first started working. He was like, I don't even have cable anymore. So, you know, and I was like, well, perfect. You can watch me on Amazon Prime. You can stream. So, you know, it's changing in terms of how we're going to put it out and where we're going to put it out. But I think long term, I'm not sure how it looks. I think overall, maybe this is a very news anchor in a newsroom answer, but I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of VJs in different areas and less newsrooms in different areas, which will probably keep the industry alive. But I think there's value in community journalism and local journalism, and I think there's a you know,
So
people
just
are
using
missing
technology to the advantage, so you don't have to set up actual newsrooms. And
yeah, it's cheaper. You know, you have one hub that will do all of your news. You know, based out of Toronto, let's say, and I'm hosting the news for Kingston, Ontario, London, Ontario, and whatnot. But I'm based out of Toronto. The content is for those cities, and then we just have journalists in those cities that are doing reports.
But here's the thing too. You don't say to the Kingston audience that you're in Toronto.
No.
There's this make believe that I'm your anchor.
Yeah.
And I find a problem with that, and it's not you, it's where the industry is going. It's
Yeah.
the same with weather. They'll have one anchor that does 6 different markets. How can you possibly really relate to your community, your an audience, if you're 1,700 kilometers away, you're doing it for Regina and you're in Toronto. But in terms of the views online, they may be there, but is money being generated? And that was a big thing for CTV. They did a huge push, but they still haven't figured out a way to make money on it, right? So I don't know. At the end of the day, do these major companies, Bell Media, the Rogers, the Choruses, do they continue to say, it's not working, more cuts?
Yeah.
Then where are we?
That's
Right?
where
And I
that's
think
where
that's
something
where we
like
are.
Vista can step in.
Sure.
A smaller company that is more community oriented. the large companies, when you have that, I know the model that Global has with the anchor in Toronto and sending out and with just reporters, you lose the community connection there. And the same thing when CTV got rid of all of its local sportscasters, you lost a community connection there. And one of our strengths at CFTO was that we were connected to the community. We were out in the community. Not only would our anchors and weathercasters, everybody would go out and do community events, but we would go out and cover the community events. And I remember working weekends ages ago, we'd go out and cover all these little community events, and people would see our cameras there, and then they'd tune in. Right. And then because of budget cuts, they said, well, we don't need to do that anymore. Well, you just lost your connection to the community. And all those people that used to watch you because they were, they wanted to see themselves on TV, they want to see their story on TV. You've lost that. And now you can't figure out, well, what happened to the audience? Where did it go? You lost your connection. Whereas Vista, which is more community-based, will get that connection and hang on to those viewers and hang on. They will get more loyalty out of them.
And still make profit.
Yeah.
And I'll even say, as now that I'm doing national news, coming from smaller markets, I, as a journalist, miss people coming up to me and saying, or reaching out to me and saying, wow, I watch you all the time. Right. That story was great. I do miss that. It makes your work feel like it's valued, and it makes it's the whole point. You got into it, right? To connect with people and hopefully share important news. So, you definitely miss that connection, I think, and that's probably what the industry is going to slowly miss.
But at the end of the day, it's a business.
Right.
And Gavin, our industry, the advertising is what supports a lot of news organizations. There was a time I remember, there was a time I remember we were paying for one page in the Globe and Mail $35,000 for one ad. And clients would buy them just no problem. When they started to go online, there's no way in the world you're going to get anywhere that many zeros to put an online ad. So they cannot generate the same kind of revenue.
So it's interesting because, I'm still very closely connected to India and media in India. I'm helping currently an independent news organization in India, one of the last standing independent news organizations in India. But I also place. I buy advertising from here in Canada for immigrants from India who are consuming Indian media coming out of India because they want to stay in touch with what's happening back home. And so I'm actively, for example, placing advertising in the Times of India group. Now, the Times of India group, Times of India, is the largest English language publication in the world. It has more readers than any publication anywhere. They completely transform themselves, and they're extremely profitable. However, there's a lesson to be learned from what they did, because I personally detest the Times of India. I'm not going to hold back. I think what they're doing, it's apart from small local news stories, which are real news stories, they don't do the news anymore. They're basically an entertainment and content vehicle. A very successful entertainment and content vehicle. They focus on lifestyle, on Bollywood, on cricket, on what everyone wants to be entertained by. They get all the eyeballs they need. They get all the advertising they need. The people will pay for them, but they will also take them for free because the advertising will subsidize all of that.
But that's how newspapers started.
Yes, absolutely.
Newspapers used to be called the Whitby Advertiser. That's how newspapers started.
Absolutely, except now we're losing something that newspapers did that were valuable, and that's a true loss. So much as I see the sort of the business plan behind that approach of the Times of India, the independent news organization that wants to convert its 5 million free readers that I'm working with, its 5 million free readers to, 75,000 paid readers. They're very humble, Even if they paid $1, for their access, it would be completely sustainable. So that's the exercise I'm doing with them. But I will say that I'm going to just read this note that I made for myself. One of the things that I'm going to circle back to the whole idea of commoditization. advertising, the business end of the business, or the dark end of the business, if you will, doesn't want news to fail. We actually want the news to succeed, because the value of those engaged readers, listeners, viewers is actually what is important to the advertising side of the business. We want that engagement, that interest, because that has downstream impact. But the sort of there's this commoditization of the product, of the news, of journalism, has produced what I call, there are 4 kinds of factories that have emerged. There's one factory which is sort of systemic. It's driven by the digital change that's running through the entire industry, which is, I call it the rush factory. We need to get things out quickly, fast, efficiently, and we need to get it out there because we're competing with a whole bunch of random voices that are making a lot of noise. So there's the rush factory. Then we've got the opinion factory, which is actual serious editorial, true journalists writing good, thoughtful, subjective work, but subjective work. So there's the opinion factory, and that change has been happening over a very long time. We've seen more and more opinion appear versus news in well-established legacy, platforms. Then we've got, I'm going to call this by its scientific name, bullshit factories. Opinions by random non-journal politicians are great at the bullshit factory. There's also journalism organizations that I believe that they are mock journalism organizations. They're not really organizations devoted to journalism. They're purely devoted to a partisan point of view, one side of, and again, it's BS all the way through. And I'm going to pick Breitbart as a good example. Does Breitbart do good writing? Yes, but the mark of a writer is not the point here. The value of the news as an independent, product is really that matters. And then I have finally what I call garbage factories, because that's where the majority of the noise is. So the garbage factories. And this is a little bit of a crossover with the bullshit factories, because you've got the misinformation and the disinformation, so you've got serious players who are heavily invested and are news organizations, but you've also got independents who are one-offs, who've got a great following, got a million followers from, and they're not all bot farms, that are following them, but but you've got propaganda, you've got completely fake news, you've got, so all of that falls under the garbage section, and everyone's in a race to commoditize. So this, at the top end of those factories are serious journalistic organizations, but they're still in a race with the lowest end even, and so that's a tremendous challenge. Is journalism therefore at risk? Yes. Do we want it not to be? Even on the commercial side, we want it not to be at risk, because it is important for it to survive.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're coming up to the end, and I just wanted to first of all see if anybody had any questions in the audience. Yes.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. So when you were talking earlier about podcasters and you didn't use the word podcasters. You stated influencers. I get most of my information from podcasters. We canceled cable during COVID. We found that, in my family anyways, that a lot of the reporting was the same, that there was no difference in reporting. And
she's on to us.
well, truly, like the Canadian press is like one of the prime references, or I'm not saying that properly, but
it's a source, a wire service that everybody subscribes to, and I see the same story in the Star and the Sun and the Globe. Right. I understand your point.
And I also don't think it's fair to say that the citizen journalist is not a true journalist, because a lot of news, like legacy news, has purchased or used videos from YouTube and Twitter, and the model that you were describing, that the news is going towards, like working in specific cities and markets, and being being on the street, that's what the citizen journalists do. They live in that area, so they can go to that news story immediately and post it right away and post the footage. So
Yeah, there's a lot of people doing some really great work. Absolutely. I think just in general, what's happening is that there's more people that aren't, and they're not being regulated. I think
I don't
that's more
think
what we're
news should
speaking
be
to.
regulated. I
No,
think there's
you're right,
such a thing
yeah.
as free speech.
But
As long as it's
Nobody's
not
debating free
regulated
As long
in the
as it's
sense
not
that, pardon me, not
malicious.
regulated in the
Yeah.
sense that nobody's verifying what they're saying. It's
Video-
No,
unverified
but we
information.
have
Exactly.
regulations. We have slander and libel, and we have hate speech, and that is regulation. We don't need more regulation than that.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
because you don't like what they're saying doesn't mean that you have a right to regulate them. And I agree with
Thank
you.
you.
And there are some great independent journalists out there that are doing some. I subscribe to a couple of them, and I love it. And there's also stuff in podcasts that.
Yeah.
I find podcasts are great for explainers. Like my favorite
Yeah.
podcast is The Decibel. Now it's still from
I like
the
The
Globe and Mail,
Decibel,
but The
yeah.
Decibel will explain things,
Long form.
backstory,
Yeah, long
long
form.
form, and I love that. And we teach our students that you can also do what we call an explainer. Like TikTok, we teach them instead of putting out your opinion on that, do an explainer. Explain the background of this story. Give them some context on this. Now that's valuable journalism. So yeah, no.
Also, I think people have lost trust in the legacy media because of what I'd said earlier about basically telling the same story. Like all of the channels have told this one, like tell the same story at the same time. And I think there was like this comical video where they had 10 or 12 different screens and they were saying the exact same thing at the exact same time. But also they're owned by corporations. CBC also is funded by the government, so there's distrust in the general public because of potential biases in that sense as well. They'll lose their funding. I'm not saying that's real. I'm just saying that that's potentially why legacy media news organizations are dying, and also the demographic, mostly older people. It's a routine for them to watch the news at 6 o'clock, and they're no offense, but they're dying off, and young people are not.
It's a fact.
And
I'm
young
retired,
people
no
are not
offense.
watching.
I got out.
You're not going to gain new,
Nah, there's no
like
new
younger
viewers, yeah.
people to watch these.
Do
And
you
I
feel
would-
do you feel that you were sufficiently informed with the way you curate your news now?
Yes, because I do fact check the best I can, but also they actually quote other news sources, right? So it's kind of, it's balanced in that sense. I don't think, they have their own bias in the sense of they've been disenchanted by legacy media, and actually that makes me think of certain people who have worked for legacy media who have their own podcasts and own channels that are getting tremendous views. Like, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of an American person. I don't watch Canadian as much. Like someone like Megyn Kelly, who has like almost 4 million viewers, and so the reach, like she was disenchanted, or I guess fired from legacy media. So then she started her own podcast and is much more popular because she can curate her own.
But
like
popular doesn't
the
mean
news.
accurate or truthful either. though.
No, I didn't say that she was accurate. I'm just using that as a reason of like an example of someone who left legacy media because they were disenchanted with working there and thinking that they were told or fed what they should put on the news. I mean the news stories. Sorry, I'm kind of all over the
No,
place
no,
with
for
this,
sure.
but,
I think
yeah.
that I can't speak to American media,
Yeah.
but I mean, even in the example that, the government has a hand in CBC, it's like you really have to picture a newsroom of over 100 people or 50 to 100 people, all from different walks of life, all from different backgrounds, religions. They would all have to be on board with this narrative that people think that they're being fed. So every single person in that room has to be like, yeah, I'm behind that lie and I don't care, and you know what I mean? But
I
I'm
don't
just
think
saying
it's a lie.
there's accountability in that there are so many different people within that same room. With Megyn Kelly, I think, she's pretty open about the fact that a lot of it is opinion as well, right?
And that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think I mentioned her specifically because of her disenchantment, I guess, with
Fair.
like legacy media.
Yeah, and it was pretty
and
high
then starting
profile
her
how she
own-
left Fox.
Yeah,
and
so
whatnot.
I'm not using her, like I don't like she's on my feed sometimes, but like on my YouTube feed, but that's not my source of information. I'm just using that as an example. But in my opinion, and from what and I'm a pretty well-educated person, I feel that legacy media is next to, like, very close to dead.
Well,
and
it pretty well is.
Yeah.
and I think that the model that you were describing is copying social media.
Yeah.
And I can just remember before we canceled our cable, we got CNN because it was part of the package, like we couldn't cancel it. So they were reporting people's opinions on Twitter. And I thought, I don't understand that, like specifically the current president. And I thought I could do that myself. Like, why do I have to watch the news to see what other people are posting on Twitter?
Here's a
You know,
question,
I thought
though.
it was a bit dumbed down.
Did you ever buy newspapers?
Well, I used to take the subway a lot when I went to U of T, and I would find them or use.
So this is my point, though,
Yeah.
that if nobody's buying a newspaper, nobody's going to pay for a channel, it's going to
Yeah.
erode, right? So you're finding an alternative source, that's wonderful. But it's still, as we mentioned, it is still a business.
Yeah.
So when you look at newspapers now, when they're going online and they have a paywall, because ultimately if they want to still adhere to truth, value, integrity, impartiality, they have to pay these people, but they need money coming in. And even for podcasting, you know, while you can have your creative freedom, if you want to be noticed and you want it to stand out, you still have to conform to certain things, like even how your label front of your podcast. You know, now it's, you know, a certain image that's cut out and layered on. That is what people are going to. So it's not as easy as just say, I'm going to do a great podcast. If you want to get traction, and if you want to eventually get sponsorship so you can make money or a living out of it. And that's what I find very frustrating. You know, my podcast is called The Big Blue Marble. It's about climate change, right? And I try to strip away the science. And it was top ranked in Earth and Science, but I don't make any money on it. It's a passion project. I want my kids to have a better future, but I'd love to pay my bills from it, right? My hosting services, a little bit of my time, and my service to do the records. But you have to conform to all these things. I don't have time for that. I publish it, I put out a couple of tweets, put it on Facebook, say, hey, a new episode, I hope you can join me. But I don't make any money on it.
So I'm just mindful of the time. It's flashing red. I want to thank, first of all, Jack, thank you very much for asking me to put this panel together. We had done one a number of years ago during COVID online. It was very successful. And thank you very much, Gavin, Bill, Amandalina, and Anwar for joining me today. And thank you for your comments. And if you will be hanging around maybe for a few minutes, so if you want to have a chat. But thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us.
But I'm not finished.
I just want to give my thanks to the panel today. This was wonderful to have you end our day. What an amazing day. It's really been a lot of things to think about. I think we've had a wide variety of voices and a lot of things to take back and reflect on. And I just want to say thanks for being here and thanks for being part of this. Do you want to?
Just want to thank York University Libraries and, of course, IFLA headquarters, IFLA FAIFE, and my dear colleagues here, Carissa, Marianne, and Christina from the FAIFE committee. And, well, this was an effort from FAIFE and from York University to bring you diverse voices, diverse perspective, to address an old problem, but in a platform society. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks so much. This was really...